An MP4 file is composed of a run of objects where each object has its own role, and this is in accordance with the ISO standard. So we are going to look at the ISO media file format, which actually stipulates how an MP4 file should be structured. Does that make sense? So an MP4 file is structured in a family tree-like manner where there are objects that composed that MP4 file, and these objects have a name which is four characters, and one of those objects is an object that is called F-type, or that has a type of F-type, and the other one is the move, and the other one is an M-dot, where the actual data is stored. So the standard stipulates that these objects are either content object or they are container object. So what's the difference? A container object, it's the one that will contain other objects. That means you can create another family tree from that object. It has children. Yeah? It's gonna have children. So these children will have name. One of them, I think it's movie header, and the other one here would be something like media. Should be media here, not track. Media, and etc. And the children of the, so this hierarchy can continue up until you get to an object that is a content object. I want to give you like a brief context of how an MP4 file is actually structured, because there's an object that I want us to look at in this video, but I want to make sure that at least you've got a brief context of how an MP4 file is structured. Movie header, for example, is a content object. So here you are able to get things like creation time, when the file was created. It actually gives you the creation time of the first track that was created in this MP4 file, because as I believe that you do know that an MP4 file may be composed of multiple tracks. One track normally would be an audio, and the second track would be a video which contains the visual, and the third track, it's the subtitle. So an MP4 file may be composed of these three tracks. Does that make sense? It doesn't have to have, or it doesn't have to contain three tracks, but it should at least contain one track. But normally MP4 files, it's video and audio together. So the first track that would be created, the date and time of the first track that will be created would be the one that is stored here, because movie header gives you the information that relates to the entire presentation. So it's gonna give you the creation time of the track that was created. If the audio track was created before the video track, in timestamps, therefore it's going to give you the creation time of that audio. If it's a video, then it's going to give you the video track. Does that make sense? So this one is a content object. The other one, it's modification date here. this object, you are able to get the modification date from this object. It's a content object, so that means it doesn't contain child objects. It contains content, so you are able to get content out of it. But objects such as media, these are container objects. Move is one of the container objects because it contains MVHD, media, and other objects. But we're going to look at this one. Media is also a container object, and inside media you are able to get a track. Depending on the number of tracks in this MP4 file, you will get multiple tracks. If you have 2 tracks, you're going to have 2 track object inside the media object, and one would be an audio and the other would be a video. If there are subtitles, you may have 3 tracks. The other object will represent the subtitle. Does that make sense? Cool. So this hierarchy can go down until you get to the content that relates to or that is specific to that track. For example, the track object itself is a container object where you are going to get a track header. So this information is similar to the information that you get from movie header. But the creation time that you're going to get here, it's the creation time of that specific track. So if the information, if for example you are looking at the audio track, so the creation time that you are going to get here is the creation time of the audio track. So inside track, you also get an object that is called STBL. Let me remove this one because that's the object that I want us to look at. Inside track, we are going to get an object called sample to table object. And inside sample to table object, we will get a set of tables that contain information that relates to the location of the actual samples within our MP4 file. Does that make sense? So we have sample table box. It's called STBL. So STBL have a set of objects inside it, and one of those objects is CTT, composition time offset. And we also have STSD, sample to description box, and we also have STTS, sample to time box, and then we also have an object that is called, there's the one that I want to look at, it's TCO object. The other object that we find inside here is STSZ. So these objects are basically tables that contain information that relates to the location of the actual samples. And remember, samples are stored inside an object called mdat inside your MP4 file. Your samples are here. So here you have an array of bytes. So using the information that you are going to get inside these tables, you are able to locate those samples inside mdat. Does that make sense? So let's look at few of these boxes. For example, let's look at STSD. The information that you're gonna get inside STSD, sample description box. This is a sample description box. So this gives us the description about the sample description box. This is a sample description box. It describes the sample Does that make sense? So what information do you get here? Inside simple description box, you get a content such as the sample description index. You get sample description index. We will see just now how it is placed as a set of bytes. Sample description box, description index, sample description index. Why? Okay, sample description index. That's the first data point that you're going to get out of the sample description box. The second data point that you are going to get here is the sample format. I think, yeah, you are able to get the format, which basically is the 4-character string, or 4-character string that describes the what do we call it, the configuration or the codec that was used to encode those samples. Does that make sense? Sample codec, sample data format, sample data format, let me put it that way, sample data format. That's the second thing that you're going to get here. So these are the two data points that you are going to get out of sample description box. There's a third one, just don't remember. I think it's sample. There's a third one. I will confirm this. There's a third thing that you have to get here. Cool, but these ones are fine. But here you are able to get these sample description. You are able to get sample data format, which would be something like AVC, the data format that are there, AVC 1 or 2 or 3, depending on that version. You can also get things like Mp4A, Mp4A. You get information such as this. It's basically the names of the codecs that were used to do what, to encode the sample that you would be looking at. Does that make sense? So samples of the same codecs will have the same sample description index. For example, if let's say you have 3 tracks inside this Mp4 file, you have an audio track, and then you have a video track. Does that make sense? So these tracks would be assigned a sample index. The samples of an audio would be assigned a sample index. Does that make sense? For example, audio may be assigned 1 and video may be assigned 2. So when you get information out of this box, all the samples of audio will be assigned 1. Every time you look at the sample description index and you see audio, you know that, okay, I'm looking at audio, you know that by an index. Does that make sense? Cool. So this gives you information about the sample, on what encodings were used to encode those samples and the index of those samples. Cool. So we have STCO. The other table that we get here is STCO. STCO is sample offset. Here we're talking about the offsets of samples. Sample offsets. So you have a table of offsets here. Sample offsets. So you have sample offsets. So you're gonna have a list of uint, which would be the offsets of a sample. For example, sample offsets. It's a list of offsets here. So a list of uint a list of uint, which are sample offsets, and these offsets are given relative to the file, which are offsets, and these offsets here are given relative to the file. They are not given relative to the box itself, on where the box is within the whole file. So the offsets are given relative to the whole file. I do have code on this one, but I'm just giving you the context so that we do understand on what is this. Then we have sample to time box. This one is TTS. It's sample to time box to time box. So here this box will take on this run of samples of this file. Let's say we are working with audio. On this run of audio samples, these samples may have different durations. They may have different duration. So an encoder is going to take all the samples that have the same duration, and record those samples, those number of samples with the same duration. I'll need to wipe this one. So the STTS, it's a table that is like this. This is an STTS box. So it has two columns. The number of samples with the same duration, and then we have the time delta with the time delta of those duration. So here, if all the samples in your file have the same duration, so therefore here you're going to have one entry, a single entry that will give, if let's say our file has a total of 10 samples, and all these samples have a duration of, let's say, 30. So here you only have this table. So what this means is that we have a total number of 10 samples with this duration. But samples within an MP4 file may have different durations. So the encoder is going to take the samples with the same duration and record those number of samples and list their sample data. So let's say the total number of samples in this file is 50 altogether. There are 50 samples of this track that we are looking for, and the first 10 samples have this duration. The second, let's say 3 samples have a duration of 5. The third, let's say the third 15 samples have a duration of 6. So this table is gonna go down until you get to the end, until you have the total number of samples with their duration being listed. So by adding all these time deltas together, you get the total duration of the whole track. So it's important, this table, because this table is able to, using this table you are able to actually pick or get to the sample using a time offset. So let's say you want to display a frame that appears at, let's say, 15 seconds. So you are able to convert this 15 second you are able to calculate from this table. You are able to calculate 15 seconds, and from that 15 seconds you are able to jump to an offset of a sample that appears at 15 seconds. That makes sense. So understanding how the data is stored within these boxes is very important, and knowing how to use these tables together, because you can't use a single table to actually get to the location of the sample. You are supposed to use different you are able to use different types of these objects to actually get the real or the actual location of of your sample. Does that make sense? So let's continue with our discussion.